Hello, everyone. I'm Alfred Edmond Jr., Senior VP, Executive Editor at Large at Black Enterprise. Welcome to another edition of Beyond the Hype. Man, do I have a treat for you. Our guest today not only has built on the legacy of one of the major forces in the pantheon of American music, his father, Thelonious Monk, but he is building quite a legacy both in music and outside of music for himself in American music, in wine, in education, in philanthropy, you name it, he is doing it, and he's doing it in his own way. Please welcome to the show, T.S. Monk.
Good to see you, Alfred.
Oh man, it's so great to see you. Listen, to start off this interview,
Sure.
I've been spending all morning getting ready to talk to you. I just watched Vitamin, the video for the rap Vitamin. Man, that was so powerful. Tell me about that and when we expect to see it and what's going on with that.
Well, in about 1963, 64, one of our greatest African-American lyricists and poets and activists by the name of Oscar Brown Jr. Wrote this poem, Vitamin. And at the time I was 14 years old. And what it did was it brought slavery into vivid relief for me, because, I back in the 60s, first of all, we didn't deal with it on American television at all. I think first time we ever really dealt with it, other than Birth of a Nation, was I think there was a movie called Drum starring Ken Norton. Back in the mid 70s, we kind of dealt with the subject, but it was something that I always said, I want to do this as a solo piece, and I guess about 10 years ago, I performed it for an audience at Birdland in New York City, and Kim Fields was in the audience. And so we, it profoundly affected her. And so we did a video, I did a re-record last year that I'm going to release. That's more to the performance, because it's like me playing and rapping at the same time, which is what I do. Which is, I do know that I'm the only jazz drummer doing that.
Like you said, it was. You can't look at that video and not be impacted. So guys, when you get a chance to see this,
But it's very relevant today, because the fact of the matter is that most of our societal problems and issues today go back to slavery. They really, really do. And the fact of the matter is America was founded on the genocide of the Native Americans. And, so when you start a country with genocide and slavery as your basis, you're bound to have problems 200 years later. And we have serious problems right now. And I'm glad to be able to say that this younger generation of African Americans and Latinos and whites and Asians have all decided that they're going to step up to the plate and bring these issues to the fore, and let's see if we can get some of them resolved. I'm very, very proud of this generation because, of course, all of us older folks were saying, well, these kids, all they're talking about is big booties and with these, all this silly stuff. But they got, as they say, woke. They got woke, and they're doing it and they're leading the charge, and it's a marvelous thing to see.
Yeah, as someone who was a Black student activist in my undergraduate years at Rutgers University, though there was a lot to be concerned about. Obviously, we had a very, very rough year in 2020 and even into 2021. I did draw real encouragement from seeing a new generation, and not just Black kids, not just Black, all over the world stepping up and saying, we have to deal with this. We have to deal with this in order to move forward as human beings.
There's two things that I think are really funny. The first thing is the founding fathers. Now, they weren't all that dynamic on a certain level. However, they wrote this document down, and when they wrote all this stuff out, they looked at it and said, oh man, this is so hip. We got to go with this, right? And so we've been taking them to task for what's actually written in the Constitution forever, And I think, with this younger generation, right, today, like my kids, they don't eat a lot of sugar. I came up with, us baby boomers came up with all these hip ideas, and then we just trashed them all, right? But our kids got it. We told our kids that your color don't matter, and they believe it, and they know it. We told our kids that, we got to take care of the planet. Then we stopped taking care of the planet, but they're on it. They're saying, hey, wait a minute, we got to take care of the planet and all this hip stuff. So sometimes, if you say the right thing and the right people hear it, then mission accomplished. Mission accomplished.
We planted some seeds that we didn't necessarily cultivate. But
exactly.
Anyway,
it's just, being a child of the age of Aquarius, I'm shocked at my Congress, because I say the Congress is all baby boomers, and look what we're doing.
Right.
Look what we're doing. We had it together. We had it together. We were about peace. We were about love. We were about unity, and then we're the ones that got into dollar bill.
Yeah.
We castigated our children for talking about it, but we're the ones that left them. And so we took our music and our arts out of the schools. We defunded our education system. Thelonious Monk, my dad, went to Stuyvesant High School in the 1930s. In the 1930s, Stuyvesant High School was the finest school in the country, public or private. And our public school system has been wonderful, and we've destroyed it.
I had the same experience. I tell people, one of my children, I raised my children in New York City and Brooklyn, and one of them did go to finish high school in what they call an independent school, but we know it was a private school, but they all went to public schools. And I tell my kids, I had to find special programs for you to dance and to sing. I grew up in a working class neighborhood in a working poor household with a divorced single mother in a public school. I played trombone, I was in the band, I was in art. That was the regular public school system.
Yes,
now,
yes.
Like you said, it's been gutted. And by the way, everything I learned that I needed to succeed in life, you got to learn the math and but it's the stuff you do outside the class that prepares you to be able to produce and accomplish and to collaborate with other people.
Well, I think there was an overemphasis on reading, writing, and arithmetic because we left out life.
Yep.
Real life.
Life.
And there's a lot of ways that, some of those things don't do anything for you in real life. That's why we have major CEOs who didn't go to college. We have people.
I want to talk to you before it slips my mind about the Monk in Palo Alto project. And again, you established your own unique legacy, but still so much of what you've done is to build on the legacy and to amplify the legacy of your father, the great Thelonious Monk. Tell me about Monk in Palo Alto.
I've always felt that my father left a legacy, and he left the kind of legacy that is admired by both African American and white Americans. That's kind of rarefied air, And so I've always felt it's my duty to build his legacy, his remembrance, because he taught me, he was such a good dad. So over the past maybe 30 years, I've been involved in uncovering various archival recordings of Thelonious, because Thelonious, although he is known as the high priest of bebop, he's also the father of modern jazz. And this is something that people are beginning to understand as time goes by. Right now, he's number 2 only to Duke Ellington as the most recorded composer in the history of jazz. And as a matter of fact, his composition, Round Midnight, is in fact the most recorded composition in the history of jazz. And so maybe a decade, 15 years ago, a guy came to me and he said, I got this recording of your dad that I did in Palo Alto High School. And lots of people come to me with all kinds of tapes and stuff, right? So I said, oh, that's nice. That's nice. And he kind of told me about it. And I said, that's nice. That's nice. That's nice. I'll talk to you. And then I forgot about it. Then about maybe 3-4 years ago, he calls me up again. And he says, my name is Danny Shear, and I've got this recording of your father that I did in Palo Alto High School. And I say, yeah. But this time I say, well, tell me about it, you know? And he says, well, I recorded it when I was 16 years old. Wow. I hired your father when I promoted the concert when I was 16 years old, right? And the janitor in the high school recorded your dad. And I've got this recording, and it sounds wonderful. And so I said, let me hear the recording. And Alfred, I have to tell you, when I heard the recording, you know, Thelonious was really a homebody in many, many ways. I mean, I spent a lot of time, me and my sister and my mom spent a lot of time with my father. And I got close enough to know when he was like on it, and when he was just, you know, he was going through the motions and doing his gig. But when he was really on it, and when I heard this recording, I said, oh my God, Thelonious, Dad is really, the band is cooking, absolutely. We've got to put this out. So about, let's see, almost 15 years ago, I partnered with a rock and roll and hip hop Hall of Famer by the name of Grand Mixer DXT. And DXT is the cat that did the scratching on Rocket and turned the whole business upside down. And he happens to be an absolutely brilliant recording engineer. And so we got together back then and we engineered the #2 all-time jazz recording now, which is Thelonious Monk and John Coltrane at Carnegie Hall, right? And I was able to get that from the National Archive, and we worked on that for maybe a solid month to restore that recording. And it was tremendous success. And so once again, we have gotten together and we got on this Palo Alto recording, which was a terrible recording for the most part in terms of the audio, but we utilized all the most modern software and the most modern techniques, which many are of DX's creation, and he ain't telling nobody how he did it, you know? But we got together and we restored this recording to Palo Alto. And if you like Monk, if you dig Thelonious Monk, you have to have this particular recording, because all those things that you love about Monk are on this recording, including him saying something very hip at the very, very end of the concert. You know, so it covers all the bases. Charlie Rouse is on tenor saxophone, and Frankie Dunlop is on drums, and I believe Larry Gale's on the bass. And they had been working down in Berkeley, right? Anyway, and you know how jazz band is. Jazz is the kind of thing that, you know, when you hit on Monday night, you know, you got it together and maybe the crowd loves you because they dig you anyway, right? But by Wednesday, you're moving towards a zone. By Friday and Saturday the next weekend, if you all love each other, the band is cooking, absolutely. And this Sunday afternoon, the band was absolutely cooking. And it's an important recording because it's very timely politically, in that at that very time in Palo Alto, California, East Palo Alto, which was the African-American community, and the Western Palo Alto, which was the white community, were at each other's, they were really at odds. This is 1968, the height of the civil rights movement. And East Palo Alto had a campaign to rename itself Nairobi. Dig that. That's how salty those black folks were. and so this concert was during that tumultuous period in Palo Alto. And this young kid, this 16-year-old kid, Danny Shear, right? He says, I want to do something to at least bring the black and the white community together for a day. And who could do that? Oh man, this guy Thelonious Monk, he's off the charts. Everybody digs him. And so he brought Thelonious, and I'm sure Thelonious was very aware of the environment that he was going into. And I think he was rather shocked at the reception that he got, because the town had told Danny Shear that this is ridiculous. He had gone into East Palo Alto alone, putting up posters. And they said, hey, kid, you need to get out of here, man. This is dangerous around here for you. And the kid says, it ain't dangerous for me around here. And he goes on and puts up his stuff. But he makes a deal with the police captain that, you know, he'll have people in the parking lot in Palo Alto because nobody believed Thelonious Monk would show up. So we'll park people in the parking lot, and if Monk shows up, then everybody will go in. Well, a huge crowd came to the parking lot because they said, you know, Thelonious Monk's been on cover of Time magazine. You don't come to places like Palo Alto. Let's go take a look. And by God, Thelonious showed up. It was a packed house. Everybody went in, and the rest was history. He just played a fantastic concert. So the backstory to this particular recording is as important as the recording itself, and the recording is off the hook. And as you can tell, the backstory is off the hook too, because Danny Shear went on to become the executive assistant for Bill Graham, probably our most famous rock and roll promoter. So he was doing it at 16 years old. And I think there wasn't no money. You know, there was no real money. I mean, Thelonious had a 4-piece band, the kid had $500, you know. But the fact of the matter is, I think my father, the idea of because Danny Shear, he didn't know how to get to Thelonious, but my father always had his phone number and his address in the yellow pages, right? So he called my father up personally. And my father talked to this kid. And he said, I want to hire you, Mr. Monk. And as a matter of fact, I think the Friday before the concert, Danny Shear called Thelonious because he knew he was down in Berkeley and said, oh, Mr. Monk, it's going to be great to see you on Sunday. And Thelonious kind of said, see me on Sunday for what? And he said, well, you know, you're playing a concert for me up in Palo Alto on Sunday afternoon. So it's just a marvelous story. It really, really is. And I encourage all Monk fans to get it.
I can't wait to hear the recording. You might notice at the top, I introduced you, your father. I told you I interviewed Marshall Thompson and Shylights as great forces in American music.
Yeah.
You know, yes, jazz, yes, R&B, yes, but we're talking about original American music. And I always try to make the point, we're talking about music in general from America, and then we can get into the genres. And I think that's true both of your influence and your father's. Talk to me about the things you've done even beyond that, though. My perception is this. People think of jazz artists in a certain way, and then they think of hip hop artists in a certain way. What you've done both in music and outside of the music, you remind me more of a hip hop artist. I mean, you got
well, I got a hip hop mentality, that's for sure.
Talk to me about how you've approached your career in a way that's very, very different from the way people. I mean, the theme of Beyond the Hype is that we say, okay, there's what you think, and then there's what's really happening beyond the hype.
Yeah. Well, let me give you a little background on me. You know, I got given drums by one of the greatest drummers of all time, Art Blakey. He gave me some drums. My father sent me to Max Roach's house for lessons because Max Roach was one of his tightest boys. So he sent me over there. And to make a long story short, I practiced for the next 5 years, and my father didn't say one word to me about music, not one word. Not, are you studying? Are you practicing? Da-da-dee, da-da-da, nothing. Then he came in the house when I was 21 years old and he said, you ready to play? And the next week I was on the bandstand with him, right?
Wow.
And which was a magic carpet ride. And I could go on for 2 hours about what it's like performing with a giant like Thelonious Monk. But suffice to say, it was a magical time in my life. And then in 1975, he retired, right? Now, you got to understand the dynamic that was going on in jazz in 1975. Not for Thelonious Monk, but for the majority of the jazz community, that was the low point of jazz. They had even stopped putting liner notes on the albums. That's how crazy the record companies got, you know? And so I am part of, I call jazz's Generation X. I'm 71 years right now, but in 1975, I was 25. And if you look at classic R&B, Earth, Wind and Fire, the Commodores, the Blackbirds, Slave, Lakeside, if you look at all those groups, 90% of the musicians in those bands would tell you, well, I was a jazz cat, but I had to take a boogaloo gig on the weekends to make ends meet. And so you had this tremendous influx of my generation into R&B that gave us Earth, Wind, Fire, that gave us the Blackbirds, that gave us all this marvelous music and all this wonderful.
Kool and the Gang, that was true.
Kool and the Gang, all this, you know, all this marvelous technological innovations in terms of mixing and the sound and the stereos, all of that stuff, right? And so I did that. 1980, I find myself with some hit records, right? I formed a group with my sister, and one of the records I made is in heavy rotation all over the country to this day, and it's 40 years later. That was 1980, you know. So in 1980, I was the
Bon Bon V.
Bon Bon V.
Rotation. iTunes in the gym right now.
And that year was the first year of the R&B Awards, and I won the new artist. We won the new artist of the year, you know. And Yarborough and Peoples had the record of the year, and the album of the year was Gap Band, Burning Rubber. And the next thing I know, unfortunately, my sister and my girlfriend, who was the other part, Yvonne Fletcher of the T.S. Monk Group, both contracted cancer. Yvonne in July of 1983, and passed away in October. And my sister in October of 1983 had the same kind of virulent cancer and passed away in January. So all of a sudden, there was just me. There was no T.S. Monk Band. And I got out of the music for essentially about 7 years. From 1984 on, I stopped playing drums. I didn't do any music. I only did one thing during that period, and that was a guy came to me by the name of Denroy Morgan, yes. Right? He had a great record called I Do, yeah. Right? And he comes to me. We were both living in Brooklyn, and he was living not too many blocks away from me, and a friend of my family said, Denroy wants to talk to you. I said, don't come on by. So he comes by and he tells me, listen, I got 27 children. I said, 27 children? He said, yeah, 27 children. I said, where are they? He said, they're all in the house right there on Bushwick Avenue. But 9 of them have a group. And I need somebody to teach them about the studio and teach them about production and teach them about how you put a record together and all that stuff. And I wasn't doing nothing. So I said, send the kids over. So I spent the next year mentoring these kids, right? I did that from like 1985 to maybe a year and a half, right? Well, those kids today are icons on the island of Jamaica. They're called Morgan's Heritage.
Yes, I know. Yes.
Those are my kids. But that was the only music I dealt with. And then in 1987, we had formed a foundation. My sister formed a foundation for my father. And the foundation, you know, all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, so we have this foundation. Let me put it this way. We have this foundation, and some relatives of mine down in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, where my father was born, had started a campaign to name a community center after Thelonious Monk, right? And so we get involved, and what they had done was they had talked to an old lady by the name of Maria Fisher, who was the founder of the Beethoven Society. And they asked her, how do you do this kind of thing? You did it for Beethoven. How can we do it for Thelonious Monk? Now, remember, mind you, all this time, I don't know nothing about all this going on, right? But eventually she said, oh, well, I'll help you out. And she said, but is there anybody closer to Thelonious Monk than you guys? Because these are like second cousins and all of that, right? And she said, they said, well, he's got a son up in New York. And so they sent somebody up to talk to me. And that gave birth to the Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz. And the Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz is probably, has been, or had been, because it's no longer there, the #1 jazz education program in the world for 27 years. And I was the chairman. And I always like to say, we put more major jazz artists in the marketplace than any of the major labels. You know, people like Joshua Redman, you know, people like Marcus Roberts, you know, and the list goes on and on and on and on. You know, so I did that for 25 years. The whole time, mind you, so it's so crazy. My life.
What makes me think of you the way you approach the music business, like a hip hop artist, is what you've done since 2016 when you stepped down that position. And like I said, I'm looking at, you know, wine, you know how you see artists like Jay-Z or 50 Cent and there, but you think of that with hip hop, but you're doing that and you've been doing that.
Yeah.
As artists.
Well, you know, the thing is that, and it was my son. By the way, the Thelonious Monk you love is actually Thelonious Monk Jr. I'm actually the third. I have a son that's the fourth. Yes. You know, but you know, my son was the one who said, you know, Dad, people love Granddaddy's music, but they also love the ideology.
Yes.
That goes along with the music. They're like one. The concept of uniqueness and going your own way and, you know, things like that. And he said, that's a brand. That is a brand in the minds of people. Monk represents something that's a little greater than just the music. And, you know, so in, I guess about 2007, 2008, I joined forces with North Coast Brewing Company out in California and developed an ale called Brother Thelonious, which has been very, very successful and wins contests in Germany, which is the beer capital of the world. So this is not a jive. This is a serious Belgian ale. Most recently, I've partnered with Vanville Vineyards in Tuscan, Italy, and developed a wine called Legit, and it's got a 94 rating from Wine Tasters magazine. It's the top critic in the world of wine loves Legit. You know, my children have started a merchandising business, which is growing. I'm in talks now with maybe three major film concerns, a major Hollywood concern about about Thelonious' life story, because it's very, very interesting. You know, he's not this oddball guy that people think he is. That's how they sold him. In fact, the record company came to him one day and said, you know, we're going to have to sell you as a madman. It pissed him off. It pissed him off, right? But he loved his family. He had to earn a living. He had to feed us. So he went along with it. So people think of Thelonious as like this kind of austere, off the radar kind of guy. And you know, people say things like, oh, well, Monk didn't like to talk. Can I tell you something about my father? My father was one of those people, you know, the kind of people where, you know, after a while you say, is he ever going to shut up? That's how Thelonious was at home. That's how he was at home. But if you didn't have anything to say, he didn't have anything to say to you. And often, considering the criticism that he got from the jazz media, essentially for the majority of his career, he was pan. The music makes no sense. He's playing the wrong chords. His technique doesn't make any sense, that kind of thing. So he didn't have a lot to say when it came, to interviews and that kind of thing. But this was a very, very personal guy. He ran community centers as a kid in the neighborhood. It was once said that he had absolutely no, so he was so odd because he had absolutely no association with European classical music. The fact of the matter is that Thelonious' first teacher was a concert master for the New York Philharmonic, who used to brag that he had this little African-American kid that was extraordinary at playing Rachmaninoff and Chopin and all this stuff. So, because I hate, something I hate is that feral genius thing that they drop on us, like, oh, he just does that.
Oh yeah.
So like we didn't do the work.
No training.
Like
we didn't train. We didn't. No. Sports. They're just.
I had an argument on the beach with a guy about Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, because the guy was telling me, well, Larry Bird practices 3,000 foul shots during the summer back in Indiana. And I said, what do you think? Magic Johnson doesn't practice?
Right.
It's crazy. So, the brand of Monk, we've got a couple of biopics. We have a TV channel that we're getting ready to do, so it's like, and then of course there's his catalog and the publishing. We're probably we have a wonderful long-term relationship with Universal Music. We'll probably be releasing something new, never heard before, from Monk every year for at least the next 5 years, and probably longer than that, but it's a 5-year deal, so that's good. So it's all about, we have not monetized, yes, there's the Jay-Z and there's these hip hop kids, but as a rule, we have not monetized our personality, our brands, although the greatest society has. The best example that I've ever seen is Aunt Jemima.
Yes. True.
And her family, just in the last couple of years, has gotten into court because she never got a dime. Everybody thinks she didn't exist. Yes, she existed, and yes, that was her formula, because we were the cooks.
Yeah.
It's like a no-brainer. It's like a no-brainer.
Yes.
So the branding of the Monk name, once I realized, and my son had me realize that Granddad really does represent more than just the music. And when it comes to the music, I have to say that there are so many innovations that came from Thelonious Monk that they filtered down and trickled down into R&B, into rock and roll, into country, into everything, including some of the newer American classical composers. He's influenced everybody, I tell kids in clinics sometimes, I say, no Monk, no Parliament Funkadelic.
And that's why I said, you guys are American or world music icons. Yes, I always say it's a disservice to just boil it down to whatever the genre you know them for, when the influence is universal. And that, so if you want to brag about Beethoven, or you want to brag about, the names that people throw out.
Yeah.
The great. I was like, then you got to brag about Monk too. You can't just, you
can't cherry pick. You can't cherry pick. And I'll tell you something. We developed, myself and Herbie Hancock developed International Jazz Day several years ago. And that has been, when we did it from Osaka, Japan in 2015, I think, it was broadcast, it was streamed to 2.2 billion people, because jazz is in fact the only genre that is played in every country in the world. Every country. Now there's some places you can go, you play some of these records here today, they'll cut your head off for playing them records in some countries, but jazz, because jazz is in fact the most human musical manifestation of the human condition. It really, really is. It's about being yourself. the fundamentals of jazz. And remember, this music came to people who were denied, and often people who are denied will their aspirations will come out in their art. So what are the fundamentals of jazz? Well, the fundamentals of jazz are things like everybody's got something to say, because we didn't have anything to say. The fundamentals of jazz are about everybody's included, because we weren't included. The fundamentals of jazz say we can communicate no matter what language we speak, because a cat can be in Japan, and a cat can be in the Ukraine, and a cat can be in Brazil, and they can all play the blues together. And they can, you dig? Yeah. So all of these things that come to this confluence of philosophical ideas, right, in jazz are appealing to everybody in the world. 99.9% of people in the world believe that everybody's got something to say. 99% of people believe that we should be able to talk. We don't need to be enemies. 99% of people say everybody should be included, you know? So this thing, jazz, you know, and what Thelonious did within that, he kicked the door open to the room. Jazz was almost like socialism, you know, from the swing days where, you know, everybody was dedicated to the group. You dig? But the final phase was democracy. And so here comes Monk and Dizzy and Bird and Miles and Coltrane and these guys, right? With the democratic manifestation of jazz, which is about a jazz band is a team. And the team is dedicated to the individual. And the individual is dedicated to the team. And the individual switches from time to time. So when the trumpet player is playing, he's the leader of the band when he's soloing. And when he gives up the solo to the tenor player, he's now the leader of the band, and everybody's dedicated to him. So all these principles, dig, are embodied in this music called jazz, and people feel it even when they don't know it, even when they can't articulate it the way I can.
Wow, wow, wow. Listen, you touched on something else I want to make sure we don't miss during the course of this interview.
Sure.
And that is the degree to which, and it's not just in jazz, I would say it's in other genres of music as well, where the creators don't profit from the creation.
Yes.
Talk to me about the Black Music Artists Coalition and other things that you've done. Because again, you're really, you approach the music, of course, because you're a musician, but you also approach the business and the understanding of the nature of the business. And we live in it's an industry where often the art, not often, almost all the time, the artist doesn't profit from their own creation.
You know, my father sent me to prep school, real fancy prep school in Connecticut in the 1960s. And my sister. I don't know how he was able to afford it because he wasn't making that much bread, but he did it. But at the same time, he kept me on his leg. I went everywhere with him. We'd go to Art's house and Coleman Hawkins' house. And I'd meet all the cats coming in the house, Sonny Rollins and Miles Davis and Coltrane and all these cats, right? And, you know, upon reflection, around the time we started the Institute, I realized that there was a reason for that, because I was also a musician. But I was meant to be able to tell this story and to understand the dynamic that was going on. When it came to the money, I realized why so many jazz musicians had good reason to shoot dope, had good reason to zone out, because they were being told on the one hand, like my father, that you're a genius. But the bank account never reflected that. And their music was being stolen, and they were subjected to all kinds of, you know, Billie Holiday wrote Strange Fruit, right? But her whole generation saw that strange fruit. Monk and Miles and Coltrane and Dizzy and all those guys traveled the South, just like Billie Holiday had to use the Green Book, lots of times had nowhere to stay, had to deal with Thelonious, got beat half to death in Delaware for asking directions. He walked into the front door of a hotel, the owner saw him and called the police. And what did the police want to do? They wanted to beat his hands. So jazz musicians, but at the same time, the greater society would tell you, jazz don't make no money. Jazz don't make no money. Now, let me ask you, what product stays on the shelf for 40 and 50 years that don't make no money?
None. If it's on the shelf,
none. It's on the shelf. And that's been the condition. I mean, the whole world of catalog came out of jazz because somebody in the mid 70s said, you know what, Bob, this Charlie Parker record that he made in 1955, it's selling more today than it ever did, right? In the mid 90s, an executive at Blue Note told me 75% of their income was from catalog, music recorded 20 and 30 and 40 years earlier, So this has been a moneymaker for everybody, and it's been often the basis for bottom lines at a lot of companies so that they could do other things, you see, because they had this catalog of jazz, which cost them no money, Now me, for instance, I partnered with really one of the icons of the cannabis business, Bubba Kush, and because I said, the price my dad and his friends paid for having marijuana back in the 50s is unbelievable. And we're going to make some money off marijuana now. They want to legalize it. Well, Monk is in because they destroyed careers. I mean, even the Gene Krupa story, they found one joint on this man and his career was never the same.
So what I want to do to tie kind of a ball around it, because I want our audience to really get this. First of all, I want our audience to know where they can, do business with you. Where can they get legit wine? When can they get the cannabis products? We actually do a series at Black Enterprise called Green Enterprise. That's a series similar to this one where we profile cannabis entrepreneurs and the industry for that same point that you're making. For so long, we paid the price of that. And now it's suddenly legalized and it's a great industry. And we're like, we don't want to be locked out of that industry. But what's the best way our audience can get access to ale, the wine?
You can get legit wine from Vin Connect. Go to vinconnect.com and you can find legit wine. If you go to theloniousmonk.store, you can find all kinds of merchandising that my kids put together, t-shirts and sweatshirts and gloves and dog collars and watches and all kinds of stuff. Of course, North Coast Brewery, you can find Brother Thelonious in local liquor stores, some local liquor stores. You can find it in Whole Foods. Let me see. And the cannabis, we're developing the strain right now. So the cannabis products with Monk and Bubba Kush won't be out probably for another couple of months. But as soon as that is coming out, believe me, I'm gonna let everybody know that, And of course, as I said, we're working on 2 biopics and a major movie with major players at this time. So your viewers are going to see a lot of Monk over the next few days. I'm gonna get a car. I'm gonna get a car named that the Thelonious model or something, a Rolls Royce or something. You know what I'm saying? Because of what he represents. But I'm the first one in jazz to do this. And I remember walking down Broadway in New York City as a kid and seeing Louis Armstrong bobblehead dolls and that kind of thing. And I said, and I know Louis wasn't making no money. I know he wasn't making no money because nobody really got hip to that until Elvis's people said, you know what? You can ride down Route 66 and all over the country and they got all this Elvis Presley stuff and Elvis ain't making a dime. It's all about Graceland, honey. It's all about Graceland. And now anything Elvis Presley, you got to go to the Presley family. And his estate is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's wonderful because at the time that Elvis was living, and once again, he, like many jazz musicians, when I think about it, I say, okay, this guy did himself in doing drugs, accidentally, but that's how it happened. But why was he doing that? Because he wasn't that happy. Wow. And I said to myself, well, if I was earning $1 and I was earning a quarter of that dollar that I generated, and somebody else was getting 75 cents, and that was true for every dollar, I might be a little depressed too. I might be taking drugs too. I might be getting high too. You see, so the artist, I don't want your viewers to believe that the ripoff in music has been exclusive to African Americans. We've just been at the bottom of the ladder. Wow. But you can get complaints from everybody up and down the line, white artists, black artists, Latino artists, everybody. And you know what? I remember walking down the halls of Warner Brothers, right, in the early 80s, and an executive who I won't name looked at me and he says, you know that house music, you know that hip hop, we're never touching it. Well, that gave rise to Jay-Z and P. Diddy and Master P and all those millionaire and zillionaire kids, because they said, oh, you want to distribute my music? I'll get FedEx. I'll use my Cadillac. I will get it out there. And the major labels did not know that they had kicked open the door, and it really changed the whole music industry, because now people are not on major labels. Major labels are looking at catalog. You know, everybody's independent. And, you know, you got kids, you got hip hop kids that are selling 500,000 units over the social media, you know, and even when it comes to streaming, you know, and Napster, that kind of thing, you know, the record companies, they made a great deal for themselves. But as I heard that young boy that made Pharrell, he was talking about how he had to stream like 4 million tunes to get $7, you know, and it's been unbelievable. So it's a different world, but I'm having a good time.
Well, that's where I was going to go to kind of wrap up this interview. I keep mentioning Marshall Thompson in my interview with him. What you have in common is you guys are having a ball. Like, you're having fun, you're excited, you're energized. And he's like, as long as I'm having fun, I can do this. You know, it's all about. So, you know, talk to me about the energy that you bring into this as we wrap up our conversation. And I mean, you don't sound like somebody who's, you know, 20, 30 years in. You sound like somebody's like, man, I'm going to do this next. I'm going to do that next. Talk about that.
You know, I didn't expect to be having such a good time at this point in my life, because I still have my own band. You know, as soon as this pandemic is over, I'll be back out on the road. I have my own albums. You know, I had hit records as an R&B artist. I've had hit records as a jazz artist, you know, and now all of this stuff, you know, with the business, it's like a new adventure, man, you know, and you're only as old as you think you are, you know, it's all up here. I remember when I was a young kid, there was a brilliant philosopher that we all used to listen to. His name was Bertrand Russell, right? He was like 95 years old, right? And happening, man, his brain was popping at 95, you know? So, you know, to me, it's like a lease on life. And quite frankly, the pandemic, because everybody's had to sit home, I've had a lot of time to think and get these levers, really get them going, you know? So I'm having a good time. And I would suggest that a lot of other jazz musicians, you know, look at themselves more as a brand. You know, I even got a peanut brittle out there, you know, I'm doing that too, you know, and people say, well, what did Monk have to do with peanut brittle? Well, you know, what did Paul Newman have to do with Italian dressing? What? You know what I'm saying? I remember, you know, and the kids have no shame. They say, I'm gonna market myself, you know. So I feel like a 71-year-old kid. So I'm marketing daddy, and quite frankly, like I said, I'm so grateful to him. You know, I want to tell you something that he did that made all that I'm doing possible. And that was in 1961, there was a jazz musician by the name of Gigi Grice. Gigi Grice. And he was effectively the Kurt Flood of jazz. He was the guy that started telling the musicians, You got to put your music in your own publishing company. Stop giving it away. And Thelonious took him to heart, but he took it a step further. Thelonious formed a publishing company, and all of his music and any music that he wrote from that point forward, he put in this company, right? So there's a few entities that own a few tunes, but I own 95% of Thelonious' music. And then he and my mother, God bless her soul, my mother Nellie, they took it a step further because they were married in North Carolina. And as you may or may not know, there have been times when this United States government has chosen not to recognize African-American marriages done by African-American preachers down south. You dig? So to ensure that no matter what surrogates court would have to say, he put that company in me and my baby sister's name so that it didn't need no will, didn't need no documentation. Oh, who owns Thelonious Monk's music? Who owns the publishing? His two kids. There it is in the company. And I am so grateful to him for doing that. And that's why I have to do all of these things that I'm doing, because he left me something to build on. Man. That's a great thing. So many of us African Americans don't have anything because they've kept us from accruing wealth. You know, having a $300,000 a year job is only really great if you can have a pension that you can leave to your kids. You know what I'm saying? And we have not been allowed to accrue wealth. He left me and my sister wealth. My mother and father left us wealth, and I'm just trying to grow it.
Man, I can't think of a better note to end the interview on for a Black Enterprise interview. Listen, I am so thankful. I am so grateful you took the time to spend with me on Beyond the Hype. You're talking about legacy. That's what we're talking about. And legacy is what you can pass on. And so, yep. Again, I am so pleased. I'm so grateful. I so enjoyed this conversation. I could talk for another hour. You know.
Oh, well, you see, I'm like my father. I don't shut up. But Alfred, thank you so much, Alfred, for taking the time.
My pleasure. This is Alfred Edmond Jr. I'm Senior VP Executive Editor at Large at Black Enterprise. This has been another amazing edition of Beyond the Hype. Take care. See you next time.